I think we're live. I'm Anna. I'm the Cooperative Party's Policy Officer, and I'm really excited that we have Councillor Rosa Bolger here, who is capable of introducing herself and what she does.
I am a West Oxfordshire District Councillor, specifically for Witney East. Witney, of course, being David Cameron's constituency, which we like to talk about as much as possible, especially as just last week in the local elections we took control of Witney Town Council, which is very exciting.
Yes, on a very strong cooperative platform.
That's right, we ran a very strong cooperative campaign, and I'm really pleased to also become the first ever woman leader of the Witney Town Council, which is super exciting.
Yes, lots of congratulations. And so I guess before we kick off, I'll just do a bit of intro on why we're having today's chat, and then maybe we can hear a bit about the cooperative plans for Witney and how we're going to make West Oxfordshire a haven for co-ops, and then open it out to you guys to give us your thoughts, your ideas, any local examples of good policies and projects in practice in your local areas. But I guess this forms part of our policy process. Our formal policy is a member-led process. We have a public consultation. Lots of you might have attended local branch meetings, local party council meetings, had discussions with other members, or you might have been one of the hundreds of people who have sent your ideas in using our online forms. And one of the topics we're consulting on this year is around community power and place. Mm-hmm. So really appropriate that we've got one of our top co-op councillors here to help us talk about it. And if you haven't had a look online, we've got a bit of a briefing and a bit of some questions for you to answer on there, so do take a look on our policy pages. So I guess before we set off, I'm going to try a piece of technology. We have a poll that I'm going to publish, and what we would love to know while we're chatting is whether you believe your local community is strong and cohesive, and use the comments to tell us why or why not, and we'll come back to that and keep half an eye out. And if you've got some interesting questions or points to make, we can pick those up later in the chat. But no, let's go back to Witney and the cooperative haven that is Oxfordshire these days. What do you think was sort of engaging about your policy platform? What are you hoping to do?
The community has been really looking for a change over the last few years. Obviously, it being David Cameron's former constituency, there's a lot of angst felt from people about the B word, which I won't say, and I think people are ready for a change and ready to find a different option. And one of the things we've really focused on, particularly over the last year, but before that as well, is really empowering the community's voice and running community-led campaigns where we ask the community what they want to happen, and we see ourselves as people who can amplify that voice, but it's the community's voice, not our voice.
It's really nice.
And I think that's been really important, and it's opened people up to labour and cooperative values, maybe even voting labour and cooperative when they wouldn't have traditionally done that, and that's been really important to us.
And I guess we've got a lot of councillors, hundreds of councillors across the country, and while some of us are lucky enough to be councillors where we are in control of the council and get on with putting some of these into practice, it's tough being in opposition, and that was your sort of experience when you were first elected, but you seem to have been able to do all sorts of things.
That's right, it is tough being in opposition, but until a week ago it's all I'd ever experienced. And I've only been doing it for a year on West Oxfordshire District Council, and I think we're quite a diverse and quite a talented group in West Oxfordshire, and I think we didn't see that as a barrier. Yes, we're in opposition, doesn't mean we can't do things. No. Let's do them anyway. We just have to do them more creatively to persuade the Conservative ruling group that they want to do them. Often that means kind of plugging in little ideas at a time. And then occasionally the Conservatives will even adopt that as their own idea, which is fine. That's how we want to go about it, as long as we can get things done.
Modern slavery charter that actually, while it was Labour and co-op councillors leading the way and Labour councils who were putting it in place to start with, we've seen councils of all colours adopting it. So I think sort of taking that message on, that there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do in your community or from the backbenches is good.
Yeah, so that's really good. So shall I talk a little bit about some of the community campaigns we've done? So one of the things that really frustrated me as a new councillor was being told well, why would you work on that? That's not district council, that's county's responsibility, or that's town's responsibility. And for me, maybe slightly naively, I just thought, well, if I'm representing the residents, that affects them. They don't care what tier of council deals with that particular issue. So if they don't care, I don't care. Let's be creative and let's get some things done, especially with austerity cuts. All councils are struggling, so let's all work together and try and do some of these things. So shortly after I was elected last year, the doctor's surgery in my ward went under threat of closure, and I was told, well, don't think about that because you're a district councillor, it's nothing to do with you. And I said, well, my residents care. So along with my colleague, Councillor Duncan Enright, we launched the Save Cog Surgery campaign.
Very good.
Where we basically said to the community, what do you want to happen? And we held open meetings, public forums, and we got them to say what they wanted to see out of the surgery. Overwhelmingly, they didn't want it to close. No, overwhelmingly, they wanted it to stay in the same location, and they wanted it to retain a lot of the services it already had. So our job then was to amplify their voice. So we met with the CCG, we worked with the other councils and other councillors too of other political parties, and that was great. And we just put forward the message that the community want this to stay open, so let's not close it. So it went through various process and things, but it stayed open in the end, and that was a real win for the community.
That's good.
Yeah, and we tried to make a point of never saying that we saved the surgery, because we didn't, the community did.
Yeah.
All we did was help them along the way, and that was really important.
And that sort of piece around getting people to participate, have you found that some of the people who got involved in that maybe hadn't been involved in stuff before? Have
Absolutely.
they got involved in stuff since?
Some of them are elected councillors
really?
now.
That is...
We've had a lot of people who have really come around to the way of thinking in labour and cooperative values, and wanting to become more involved, wanting to take on different roles within our community, and also more roles politically, which is really nice, and kind of making politics accessible to everyone.
Yes.
has been a really important part of that too.
That's really good. And it wouldn't be a chat about Witney if we didn't talk about your bus either.
Of course, West Oxfordshire Community Transport. Councillor Laura Price was instrumental in setting up West Oxfordshire Community Transport. It was a direct response to the loss of bus services and the loss of bus routes. We're a very rural community, and we have a lot of isolation, and if there's not public transport, that is made a lot worse.
Yeah.
What was great was it was formed as a cooperative. Many people from all parts of the community are members, and we have this wonderful bus that has replaced routes that have been cut. In my ward, it runs around between some of our more residential areas, to the doctor's surgery, to the shops, and into the centre of town. And I think what's quite important is a lot of people might think, oh great, a community bus, there's a lot of the older generation using that. Not true. Loads of people are using it. People are hopping on it to go to work in town, hopping on it to pop to the store in town, all that kind of thing, and it's really nice. It's become really accessible to everyone.
And we've seen that other people take inspiration, so you do one good co-op thing in one place, and by helping to sort of share the experiences and some of the hiccups that you get from setting anything up, we're able to inspire others. So I think in Basildon it formed a big part of the Basildon Labour Manifesto to have the Bas Bus, which is exciting, and so hopefully we can start to see different projects cropping up all over the place, inspired by each other.
Really exciting to hear. One of the other community campaigns we helped out on this year is we've got a wonderful organisation called the Muso Academy. Hi, if you're watching. And they run music lessons for children, teenagers, but also older people, and they work with people with special educational needs, and also adults with dementia, and a really wide scope of people. And it's also affordable for children that need the opportunity to have access to music and culture and all that kind of thing. And last year their building they were in, that they had been renting for a long time and had made their home, was to be knocked down and turned into flats. Luxury flats that we just don't need in the centre of Witney, and it was a real shame. Anyway, unfortunately we lost the campaign to save the building, but what it has done is it's promoted them as a community. They've since found a new space. We've supported them through that. We saw some wonderful things happening, like one of our secondary schools offered to store their equipment while they
brilliant.
moved, and just really lovely things that build really strong communities. So yeah, the Museum Academy have some exciting stuff going on and are about to move into a new location too, so that's really good.
You made me think of another sort of community response to Coops and around music is we've got the Music Teachers Co-op that's set up in response to school. So there's a music teacher co-op, I want to say in Swindon, which enables those staff to be able to work together and support each other, and the schools to kind of work together a bit too. So there are sort of good things that come out of difficult circumstances sometimes.
Yeah, and it's super exciting to see. I think it's just creativity.
Yes.
Rather than, as councillors, as elected officials, rather than just saying, oh, that's a real shame, we can't do anything about it, saying, well, yes, we can, let's find a way, let's find these solutions, and that gets the community behind ideas as well.
Absolutely.
Which has been really good.
I'm going to see if we've got any comments before we kick off the next question. So we've got Peter Joyce is talking about politics accessible to everyone could be gained through a cultural mind change and shift to collaboration and cooperation to find mutual interest across the community, and some really interesting examples from, I think, South Africa. So that's really interesting, thank you. And Gaynor says the two parties have a huge amount in common. I'm assuming you mean Labour and Co-op, which is, yes, we think so too. So no, really good to get some examples, so please keep sending them over. So we've got some policy questions. They can be found online, and we're hoping that you'll be able to share your experiences. And we've got a variety of stuff. Some is around your local community and your experiences. Some is around what devolution looks like. And before we started, we were having a conversation about a bit of a niche area of devolution maybe that Rosa's got an idea about. But
I'm a bit obsessed with potholes. And
what good self-respecting councillor isn't obsessed with potholes?
And one of the things we realised in Witney is as we kind of struggle to see our potholes filled, and it's technically a county responsibility in West Oxfordshire, and they contract a private firm to fill our potholes, and it might so happen that in my ward, for example, on Cogs Hill Road, we might get one pothole filled, but the next one won't get filled because they haven't been contracted to do that. I really like the idea of devolution of potholes. It sounds really sexy too. And so that would mean that the money's devolved from county to town council, and town council have a team who go around filling potholes and changing street lights and things like that could be done on a local level, and don't need someone to come all the way from Oxford to Witney to do that. Why not have our own team that can do it as they go, and they know the roads, they know our area, residents can communicate with them a lot easier than they can the county, and we can get some things done. And isn't that what we're supposed to do as a council?
And we talk a lot about this principle of subsidiarity, so sort of doing things at the lowest common level means people have the greatest relationship with the organisation or people who are doing it, and potholes serve as a good example of what that might look like in practice. But it is complicated we talk a lot about things like the Preston model or what big cities are doing, but actually in parts of the country where you've got 3 tiers of government, residents don't necessarily understand the difference between them. How you apply some of the policy and thinking that's happening in lots of other parts of the country to a place like Witney, I guess, is a bit of a challenge for you.
That's right. Well, first of all, I think residents shouldn't have to understand the differences.
No.
I think the different tiers of council, if we all work together, we're all aiming for the same thing. We're all aiming to most effectively and efficiently deliver the best frontline services.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing. I think also that what was your second question? I can't remember.
Well, I guess, assuming that we don't need them to understand the difference, how do we as councillors or us as the cooperative party and members apply some of the learning from places where maybe it's more straightforward and we write policy? A lot of policy focuses around cities and city regions. How do we make that relevant to towns and places where local government's a bit more complicated, or you might have a Tory county and a Labour town, for example.
So we take a lot of inspiration from Preston and bigger cities and their community wealth building models. And I think while we are a rural market town, and that's really important to remember, we're also now, after 10 years of austerity, not immune to some of the traditionally inner city issues.
Okay.
You know, we have child poverty, we have hunger in our towns, we have lack of transportation, we have isolation, we have all these things that you might expect to come from the inner city. And so we have to think of our way of working as a bit less traditional, and we have to look to cities to see what they're doing. And yes, we'll do it on a smaller level, and we'll have to be creative about the way we do it, but why not take inspiration from them? And why, you know, I'm very ambitious, but why not try and do these things?
What do you think community wealth building could look like for sort of Whitney, Oxford, Oxfordshire as a place? What does that sort of a place look like?
I think in Whitney, I'd love to see our cooperative sector grow. We commit in our local manifesto to doubling the size of our cooperative sector. And I'd love to see that grow. I'd love to see, particularly the town council, now that we're the ruling group, supporting new cooperatives and helping them set up and having information sessions and all that kind of thing. And I'd just love to see people feeling like they have ownership of the town, and that any investment they make, whether it be through work or they're spending on the high street and that sort of thing, they see it coming back and reaping the rewards in their town, for example, getting the potholes filled.
And do you think that by having a town council, or in some places you'd have parish councils, I guess as a similar function, enables some of that local work? Do you think we should part of our policy platform or lobbying or thinking be that we need more town councils, more parish councils, and, you know, the drive towards consolidation of local government? Is that, you know, a trend you... I think we underestimate the power of the community and the power of the community voice, and I think the lower the level of the council, the more the community can be included. And if we work from bottom up politics, we get a lot more done, and we also get a lot more done that our residents want us to do. We very much believe in not sitting in the council chamber making decisions. We believe in being in our communities, being told decisions, helping make decisions and feeding them to the chamber rather than the other way around. And I think that's something you do at lower level local authority. Absolutely, and I guess also identifying different parts of the community that might not have a voice. So I know that Jim, the MP in Oldham, does lots of work with his youth council, for example, to have them. They might not have a vote yet, although hopefully we can lower the voting age. But there's ways of inputting and having a say. And in Lambeth, I'm a councillor where we have the Lambeth Youth Co-op, and so a lot of our decision making around youth services is given over to our youth co-op, which engages young people
really
to make decisions about which services we commission, how we go about commissioning them. They're part of the procurement process, so it's really interesting.
Good. That is really good, and that's something we should take inspiration from in Whitney. We have the town council last year, led by Councillor Laura Price again, set up a youth forum in the town to bring together the key stakeholders of youth services and youth themselves to kind of discover what we need in the town and what we'd really like to see happen. Certainly within the immediate future on the town council is to have a working party where we can discuss youth services, and the idea of probably having a youth worker working for the town council.
Oh, brilliant.
And that's traditionally a county role, but why not bring it down to town level and have somebody that's in our community and knows our youth and can work with them and feedback directly from them?
No, absolutely, that sounds good. So one of our questions, we talk about communities report feeling powerless or excluded from politics and decision making, and how we rebalance that power in favour of communities beyond town hall. So I guess that sort of formal, having members of staff whose role it is to engage people is a really good starting point for some of that. I don't know if you've got any thoughts in other sectors about how you'd go about doing it. You've got I don't know if this is the case in Whitney, but often in towns you see that you've got a bit of an ageing population, a bit of people go off to university or go to school outside of their town, don't always come back to live there, and the jobs aren't there, and you've seen a bit of a drain into cities. Is that something that is a challenge for you?
Slightly. I mean, we do have a good employment sector in Whitney, although there are certain things affecting it. There's the Honda plant closing in Swindon, which in West Oxfordshire jobs will be lost from that plant, and start cooperatives, whether they've got skills in engineering, maintenance, all those kind of things. Why not bring them together? I think the best way of listening to our communities is #Labour Doorstep.
Yes,
gotta love some door knocking. Let's make sure as councillors we're getting out and talking to our communities and being completely accessible. One of the things actually we've just done, our first move since we took control of the town council, was to move the council chamber. And this is something that is sort of a big visual way to start a new council term. But where it was previously is in our beautiful old town hall, and it's a lovely building. But in order to get to the council chamber, you have to be able to climb 2 flights of slightly rickety stairs. That's not accessible.
No.
That's not accessible for people to become councillors if they can't climb 2 flights of stairs, and also for our residents to come and get involved. So rather than having, what is a beautiful room in the town hall with a big, beautiful, essentially a dining table with all the councillors sitting around it and public sitting looking at the councillors' backs, which doesn't feel very open. We've moved it to our beautiful Corn Exchange. The Corn Exchange, we've done a lot of development on it, and we're just going into stage 2, and we're going to keep doing some more exciting things there. If we move our chamber in there, we've got a lift. So anyone can come.
Ideal,
We've got more space. We're changing the setup so we can see the public can see us. There's more interaction. Why not make councils open?
And I know a lot of councils do live streaming of their meetings, invite people to send questions in advance.
That's right.
And it's surprising. So I was speaking to a councillor whose council live stream their meetings, and she's always fairly surprised by just how many people do bother logging in. And I think particularly where you see a decline in local press and that actually our journalism sector, there is a lot less local newspapers than there used to be. And actually the ability to directly see what's happening maybe compensates slightly, although it doesn't replace, obviously.
Yeah, and I think streaming from
our scrutiny.
Yeah, indeed. And I think streaming from our chamber is something we'd love to do in the near future. Just haven't got there yet.
A bit of technological barriers, but I'm sure we can get past that.
That's right.
So another thing we talk about is sort of empowering communities from the bottom up, starting new things. We talked a bit about the community bus and sort of campaign activity. So I don't know if anyone watching wants to share activities from their local area. Please do share sort of examples of good practice. I haven't seen any pop up so far, but do give us your thoughts, or if you're involved in a co-op or a community project, we'd love to hear about it. We find that we've got a lot around greening and growing things. So in Lambeth, we've got Incredible Edible Lambeth, for example.
Oh, wow.
Who do a lot of work in parks and with youth groups and volunteer groups to set up growing projects and food projects, which is a really nice way to bring people together and tackle, you mentioned about sort of holiday hunger and being able to tackle some of the challenges around hunger. And food have been really nice way of engaging the community from the bottom up. Yeah,
that sounds really good. And another place we take inspiration from is I worked with an organisation a few years ago called the Greening of Detroit. So this is Detroit in Michigan in the US, and they where Detroit has had a kind of a lot of gentrification in the city and a lot of communities sort of being pushed aside and forgotten about. You get these kind of empty plots. Where houses used to stand, or just between buildings and that sort of thing. You've had a lot of the community come together and start community gardens.
Oh, brilliant.
And then some of them have got together and now have stalls in the market and that kind of thing. And that's really, really lovely. I'd love to see similar things in Whitney too.
No, that would be nice. And a good way, I think, when we look at lots of the issues surrounding food policy and how far our food has to travel, and that people don't know what's in season, or getting access to really good quality, affordable fresh food is a challenge. Actually, some of that community response is really important.
Indeed, yeah.
That's really good. And we also sort of a quick plug for our food justice campaign, as I'll get in trouble with colleagues if I talk about food without plugging it. To have a look on our website at some of the stuff we're doing around food justice, and make sure that your local party and council are getting involved in that would be good. Another couple of areas you see a lot of community action is around energy and community energy, and I know that Oxford's been doing a bit of work around sustainability. I don't know if it's something that there's sort of opportunities for partnership working around
absolutely
energy and environment.
Absolutely. Councillor Tom Hayes in Oxford, hi Tom if you're watching, he's been working really hard with his colleagues in Oxford, and we take a lot of inspiration from them. and we've had lots of talks about bringing some of their ideas into Witney as well. I love the idea of doing things like car-free days.
Nice.
In Witney, empowering our local businesses. We have free parking in Witney, which I'm in support of. It brings people into our town centre, but we need to make our town centre more walking friendly as well. My children go nuts on their scooters down the high street, and I'd love if there weren't cars there occasionally, so my blood pressure wasn't quite so high. So we take a lot of inspiration from Oxford and really hope to work closely on them as we set up the new council.
I've seen a couple of examples where businesses have come together around sort of helping, high streets. It's challenging to be a local business, and lots of high streets are finding that difficult. And part of it is that online you can get things delivered to your door. So looking at local delivery solutions using the business improvement district and getting things like cargo bikes rather than vans to be able to do a much more sustainable way to it sort of both supports the high street and the local shops and encourages people to shop locally, but it's also not going to damage our environment too much.
Those are really nice
That's
ideas.
quite a nice one I've come across. And looking at sort of shared energy schemes, getting businesses to work together on getting cheaper energy by procuring together is one I think is quite interesting. And then community energy and getting sort of solar panels up on schools, libraries, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you? And on the roofs of council buildings and things like that, why wouldn't you? So but we've got some big ambitions, but one step at a time.
Yeah, no, that one's a hard one. And then I guess sort of also on the environment side, how we sort of communicate out some of the campaigning communities and getting them to save stuff. How do we sort of target some of that activity and excitement about getting involved into personal behaviour change and increasing recycling and getting people involved in that? So I think that would be one I'd love to hear. Indeed. If any of you guys or whoever have ideas on how we can encourage behaviour change and get people to be sort of cooperative in the small C version.
One of our new councillors is very keen to champion a waste-free Witney.
Oh wow!
And I think that is definitely something that needs to be done from the bottom up, and we need local residents to engage in it and really be part of it. So I think small steps like that get us to reduce our environmental impact locally are really important. Yeah.
No, and it's that thing where local relationships I think have the biggest impact. If you sort of have a edict from on high that you should thou shalt recycle, it's much harder to ignore if it comes from your neighbour or if comes from a sort of community collective activity. So I think there's a real opportunity there for
and if it's facilitated by your local council, so it's easier to be involved and easier to do all of these things. I think that's really important too.
Yeah, it's good. So I don't know if we've had many answers to the poll, but I can have a look. So apparently more people believe their local community is not strong and cohesive than do, but marginally. It's sort of B-word referendum levels of margins. So 44% of you said...
Oh, we better have another vote.
You think it... That second referendum. More of you, 56% of you think that the community is not strong and cohesive. So it'd be interesting, I guess, to have a think about what we mean by a strong and cohesive community. I don't know if you've got a feeling about how it feels or what are the signs of a strong community? Put you on the spot.
No, I think the main thing of a strong community is a community that feels listened to and feels empowered, and I think that's something that's been lacking in West Oxfordshire for a very long time, and I think is probably one of the reasons we've seen such dramatic change in these local elections. I think when a community feels empowered and listened to, a community feels more engaged and more willing to be part of change. And it's like with a small child, if you ignore them, they're not going to help you. If you engage them, they'll help you bake the cakes and they'll be delicious. And I think really listening to our communities and like I said before, making sure that we're a council that are accessible and outward looking and inclusive of everyone that wants to be involved.
Yeah, I think for me that the sort of strong community thing isn't always obvious from the outside looking in. People often have a feel that London isn't a place where you can have a strong community because it's so big and it's sort of so dispersed and people are commuting for work and sort of some of those social bonds are broken down. But actually I see examples of strong communities all over the place, and it sometimes requires a bit of effort to sort of lock into some of those networks. And the second you're in, it's like sort of going through the rabbit hole, and you've got this whole world of community organising out there that's sort of done on WhatsApp groups and through petitions and by setting up a market or whatever.
That's right. And I think cooperatives have a really big role to play in this too. In West Oxfordshire, we've got a lot of new housing developments.
Okay.
And we see things like the organisation that cuts the grass and looks after the kind of foliage and stuff in these new developments might be a national company, and they're sending a gardener from Birmingham to come and cut the grass in Whitney, and it just makes no sense.
Yes.
And I love the idea of setting up residents' cooperatives, so residents can work together. They hire local gardeners, they take on those services themselves, all that kind of thing, and it also builds communities because it gets people talking to each other. And I mean, I think cooperatives have a huge part to play in building communities.
We had a policy conference in London at the beginning of the year, and we had someone from Leather Market come along, which is a resident-led housing development in Southwark. Not far from the river, so sort of anyone who says that you can't do resident-led housing in places where land prices are high is nonsense, because they're doing it and they sort of prove everyone wrong. But it's, like you say, it's really empowering when residents get a say over how their homes are looked after. So they work really closely with the council, they're developing new homes as well as managing the existing ones. They run the local services, and it's really empowering. And similarly, you've got examples in Merthyr. So you've got Merthyr Valley Homes, and you've got Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, who are both, they're multi-stakeholder co-ops. So it's social housing. They're a big registered social landlord, but they are jointly owned and run democratically by tenants and staff.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
It's amazing, and so they're really doing it on scale. I think there's something to be learnt from that. And then sort of the other end, you've got new housing developments, community land trusts and co-op housing going up.
Yes.
One of my favourites, if people haven't come across it, is Lilac in Leeds.
Ooh.
Which is a really interesting, they've got a really, for geeks, it's a really interesting financing model.
Okay.
But they've built homes together that are really sustainable and create community spaces.
Right.
I think that the way that we look at housing is super important.
Yeah, and then there's a big chunk of people in the middle, which is of course private tenants. Yeah. And I think they're quite easily forgotten about. And one of the things we pledge in our local manifesto is to make sure they're not forgotten about. Make sure that there is a community place, a forum for private tenants to make sure they're protected and know their rights. Yeah. But also for the landlords. And we've committed to setting up a landlord's charter.
Oh, brilliant.
To make sure that landlords know what's expected of their properties and of them, and tenants therefore know as well what's expected, and that there's a place for everyone to come together and talk about these things and work together, and maybe that's a place for a cooperative to be formed as well.
Check in a couple of years and see how it's going. I know that sort of private renting's an area we've done quite a bit of work with our councillors on, because it's sort of a growing issue and a bit untalked about. I think not enough people in charge of renters, and that means that we don't necessarily have all the policies we need at a national level, but there's tons that local councillors can do around empowerment, so giving renters a voice, like you say, with forums. I'm really excited about the idea of a landlord co-op. So there are sort of ethical lettings agencies that are either social enterprises or they might be owned by the council. Right. So there's one, I think it's called the Ethical Lettings Company, in sort of Sutton area, but there's sort of a few across the country. But if they were owned and run by landlords, responsible landlords, because they're getting ripped off too, then it frees them up to be much more responsible and gives the, if it's self-governing and they don't want bad landlords to come in and sort of sully their reputation, so it starts to become sort of a virtuous cycle of improving, I think. But I'm just it's a challenge to anyone watching to get one set up and show us that it works. There's all sorts you can do locally, sort of landlord licensing. I know Newham and places have done a huge amount around that. Nottingham, I was looking at their licensing scheme. Okay. Private renting is definitely one where we need to be doing more and more and more if we can.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, lots of exciting things going on.
Yeah. And then sort of beyond housing, there's other scope for voice and strengthening communities. And when you were talking about the role that co-ops can play, it reminded me of an example we came across in Canada, where there's a neighbourhood where they've got a lot of immigration, and a lot of young people who are either emigrated or they're sort of first generation, and there are a lot of perceptions around young people and around immigration, which means that they're fairly excluded and that there are negative assumptions made about them and their contribution.
Right.
So this organisation has set up co-ops with teenagers.
Amazing.
So there's this, the first teenager I think is called, look it up, Mavens, and it's a web co-op, and they provide digital services to local businesses and individuals.
Fantastic.
And it's run by 17-year-old boys, sort of from all over the world, who are both doing it because it gives them skills, and it gives them, they're already employed before they finish school, and they are owners of the business. But also it challenges some of the perceptions people have about young people.
Absolutely.
And I think sort of creating strong communities through co-op models that challenge people's assumptions about parts of that community is quite interesting.
Absolutely. And if we can get cooperative values, or if we can get younger people opening their eyes to cooperative values, surely that sets us up for a better future.
I think so. Give all our hope to the teenagers and get them to change the economy for the better would be great. So I'll just see if we've got any more comments. Oh, we've got a few here. So Phil Watson, hi, says, what can be done to encourage young people to engage in local politics, particularly in cooperation? So spot on, Phil. So we talked a bit about the Young Lambeth Co-op and places like Oldham where the MP's working with the youth organisations, but I don't know, do you feel like, I mean, the typical councillor isn't young women, so I don't know if you feel like there are particular ways that you work in sort of wider Oxfordshire that has involved more young people in politics.
I think it's something we struggle with. I think every area of the country struggles with this, but we should be engaging our young people, and what we've seen, especially recently with the environmental protests and stuff, young people have things to say, and let's listen to them. We've got a relatively active youth council on Witney Town Council, and I'm certainly really excited to see that grow with our new group on the council. And I think, it sounds silly, but we should just be talking to them, and we should be listening to them, and we should be letting them lead on things. And giving them the power to get on with things and do things in our communities, rather than saying, oh, okay, that's a nice idea, we'll go and do it for you. Let's let them do it themselves. And let's let them learn these skills, and let them teach us things as well.
I think also understanding some of the concerns that they might have and making sure that our policies don't counter those anxieties is important. So in Wales they've got something called the Future Generations Act, and a Future Generations Commissioner, and basically it puts a requirement on any level of government in Wales to be considering future generations in their decision making. So you're not allowed to pass a law that damages future generations' interest. So like on the environment, for example, that's super important, because now they're having to factor in, well, actually, does this policy create a worse climate for future generations, or are we cutting school services in a way that's going to be damaging to generations that don't yet have a vote? So I think that's quite interesting. There's sort of considerations we can put in our policy and policy thinking.
We should think about that in our Brexit negotiations too.
Absolutely. So thank you, Phil. Chris, Co-operative, if that is your surname, then you are on the ground. Says, how do local councils feel about communities setting up their own alternative currencies? Well, I come from Lambeth, where we've got the Brixton pound, so I'm very excited about alternative currencies. You can get paid, if you're a council member of staff, put some of your salary in Brixton pounds.
Wow.
And there's a whole network of local businesses who accept them and have special offers or discounts if you use Brixton pounds. And I think it has shifted the people who've engaged with that currency to shop more locally and to think about how their pounds are spent. So I am excited about that.
I think it's a really lovely idea. It's something I'm just learning about, and it's one of those inspirations we take from these bigger places to do these quite radical changes and get people to have confidence in their local economies, and I mean, it's
quite proud. Like ours has a mobile app, but the actual pounds are lovely. They've got David Bowie on them, and people do feel very proud of their place and its heritage, and you know, they're really lovely things. And we've now got the Brixton Pound Cafe, where they run community events, and they do pay what you can meals using food that would otherwise be wasted. So it's created this whole sort of alternative local economy, which I think is exciting.
Wonderful.
I think they've got a Bristol Pound too. So we met with some credit unions last week, and the Bristol Credit Union came along and talked about some of the work they're doing around the Bristol Pound. So I think
sounds really good.
One to watch, and if there are other examples, I would love to hear about
I'd love to hear some
how they work. So thank you, Chris, and keep the questions coming. And Cyril, I see you're having a think about what town councils have to offer, and that you were a town councillor for 16 years, so that is dedication. Thank you. So yeah, keep engaging. And I guess we've probably got time for one more question before we wrap up. And I start plugging local government conference. But we had a question around devolution. So at the moment, there's a lot of powers in Westminster. Some of them have been devolved to Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. But I guess we were quite interested in thinking about what further powers could be devolved either to those countries or to English regions. So we've got some mayoral deals, they're all a bit different. We've got co-op mayors South Yorkshire, Dan Jarvis, and we've got co-op mayor in Manchester, for example, Andy Burnham. But how do we, beyond potholes, are there any more powers you want?
Street lighting
and potholes. Spoken like a true local councillor.
I think with all levels of council and central government struggling with austerity cuts, I got told off in the council chamber last week for using the word cuts, but I'm going to keep using it because I think it's important. Cuts. But I think while we're all struggling with cuts, if we can devolve things, it gives more power to the community to come up with creative things to fix the repercussions. And
fill the potholes and the gaps.
And the gaps in funding. I'm all for devolution. I think if you work creatively, it's a really important strategy and something we should all adopt.
Yeah, I think one of the things I often hear from councillors is an anxiety that devolution without the funding to follow it is a challenge, and that you need to think carefully about local devolution deals and mayoral deals and city region stuff through the lens of if you're giving us the power and therefore people can quite rightly hold us to account for delivery on something, if you're not also sort of loosening the purse strings and letting us have the right budget to do that, it becomes really difficult.
I think there needs to be a differentiation between devolution and just shunting of responsibility.
Yes.
And you can't just, you can't take a council who offer a service and shunt it to a smaller council and say, go on, get on with it. It has to be properly funded. It has to be a gradual process, and it's something I'm really excited to see happen for Witney in the next few years, and I'll report back as to how that goes. But I think it's definitely not just shunting of responsibility. It's got to be properly set up and properly managed.
I think with some of that devolution comes opportunities for quite exciting partnership working. So looking at community safety, for example, how do we, you've got police and crime commissioners who are looking at more local solutions to how they keep communities safe. How do they work with the CCG? How do they work with the town council? How do they work with all these different partners to create really local bottom-up solutions? What's the voice of the community in different areas where it's not necessarily a council responsibility, but there's an opportunity to be a partner in some of that, I think, is probably another maybe less formal way of devolving decision making.
Absolutely, and also with devolving decision making, it shouldn't just be elected representatives making decisions in council chambers and stuff. We should be bringing in local community figureheads, school teachers, head teachers, people working in local charities, people who are on the front line working in our communities. Why should they not be a bigger part of the decision making as we are?
Well, quite. And on that rallying call to get involved, I think we will wrap it up as we've got more co-ops to talk about later today and a lunch to eat. I hope you've all managed to have your lunch while we've been chatting. But thank you very much for joining in. Do find our policy pages and send your ideas in on the 9 questions, or if we've missed a question and you've got a burning desire to tell us something else about it, all of our contact details are on there. Keep watching what's happening in Whitney. I think Rose is on Twitter, and if you're interested to follow how a new Labour administration is going, do give her a follow. And finally, we have our local government conference coming up on the 8th of June. It's in Newcastle. It is an opportunity to continue this conversation about how we have a positive impact in our communities from a bottom-up way, and how we empower them. Rosa will be there. So do sign up. It's only £10 and you can sign up online, and it should be a real hub of ideas and inspiration. So look forward to seeing you there. Thanks.
Thanks very much.